Good evening, everybody. This is Radio Free Mormon coming to you behind enemy lines. Tonight, we, and by we, I mean me and my compadre, Kolby Reddish, will be talking about the Light on Truth letter. Again, no fear, because we're getting toward the end. We're in chapter 11, or rather, what should be chapter 11, if Austin Fife had labeled his chapters as chapters. We're doing that for him. It's chapter 11. It's dealing with testimony. It's dealing with spiritual experiences. And we'll be dealing with Kolby Reddish and Radio Free Mormon as we take apart this chapter. Now, good morning. Kolby, how are you doing?
Good morning, RFM. I feel like we've barely seen each other this week.
I know. It's been a lot of Kolby. It's been Kolby on Wednesday. It was Kolby on Friday. And it's going to be Kolby again on Saturday.
Yeah.
That's a lot of Kolby.
That's a lot of Kolby. I'm sure you're sick of me by the end of this.
Especially if it were Kolby cheese.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of cheese.
You probably have never had fun made of your name by kids back when you were in school on account of Kolby cheese, have you?
Oh, not one time. Never happened.
Okay. Well, at least you don't live in Wisconsin. That'd be the worst on top of everything. Nothing, huh? Okay, that was supposed to be a cheese joke. Didn't go over big. It's because we're not in the Midwest, but maybe some of you are and are laughing hysterically.
If it was a potato joke, I would have been rolling on the ground laughing.
Oh, that's because you're from Idaho.
Yeah.
Idaho. Okay. Well, I'll work on my potato jokes for next time. Here we have it. By the way, Kolby, how many chapters are there left? Is it 2 or 3?
I think we've got 3 episodes left, depending on how we group them together. Some of the this chapter was shorter than most of the other ones we've looked at. So today's episode will probably be a little bit shorter, especially because a large part of the chapter really isn't speaking to people like us, where he's talking to other Christians, basically trying to validate the Mormon spiritual experiences vis-a-vis other Christian experiences. We'll talk about it briefly, but that was a large part of the chapter that doesn't really pertain to you or I. So yeah, I think we've got a chapter left on plural marriage. I'd have to go look at the list that we were looking at.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. I sprang that one on you. I apologize. But I don't think there's very many left. And my goal, I don't know about your goal. Hopefully your goal will be my goal too, is to get this thing done by the end of the year.
Yes.
We are recording this, by the way, on the morning of August 30th, 2025. We hope to premiere this sucker tonight on the evening of August 30th, 2025. I hope you've had a good summer, Kolby.
It's been great.
Okay, good. Well, let's get into this, shall we? It's the Light on Truth letter. It is the chapter titled Testimony and Spiritual Witnesses. And my take on this, Kolby, is basically he's got to deal with spiritual witnesses because that is a huge deal in Mormonism. You're supposed to get your own spiritual witness that the Book of Mormon is true. It's usually the Book of Mormon, but it could be other aspects of Mormonism that you get a testimony of it, which is a spiritual witness or spiritual experience of some manner, which you then say is your testimony. It can't be more than one. It can't be less than one. It shouldn't be less than one, but it can be more than one. But this is supposed to be your testimony that you then bear about the truth of the church. And so he talks about that, and he says, I know that these are kind of squishy, and critics can say, yeah, that's not really that helpful because, number one, people in other religions have spiritual experiences that their religion is true. So why is yours different or better or more accurate? And number two, Mormons, such as myself, have had spiritual experience about things that I found out later were absolutely not true, such as war stories by Paul H. Dunn. Is that pretty much his letter? Well, he goes on to try and say, nevertheless, even though these personal little testimonies may not be that big a deal, they could be explained away rather readily. Nevertheless, members of the church, not Austin specifically so much as the history of members of the church doing great and amazing and wonderful things and sacrificing their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor for Mormonism, and therefore that cumulative sacrifice betokens or bespeaks a massive group spiritual experience that's so strong, it's got to be accorded the status of evidence.
Yes. And I think I'm one of the reasons I'm really excited to do this chapter, because we started prepping this actually a few weeks ago, and I've been thinking it over a lot, is this is actually a topic I haven't talked about a lot, or actually this is a topic I haven't talked about really at all on any ex-Mormon podcast with you or anyone else. And if I'm honest, I think this is probably one of Austin's better chapters. Like the logic of it is as bad as the rest, but the chapter itself is probably better in that it's not misrepresenting evidence. If I were doing apologetics for the church with everything I know today, this is where I would go, is the validity of spiritual experiences and attempting to treat them as evidence. Back when I was in the church, I've shared with you before that my last 4 years of callings was as a gospel doctrine teacher for my ward. I also used to work as a trainer at the MTC. And this is actually a topic that I would talk a lot about with missionaries. I had like a whole apologetic scripture chase diatribe where I would explain to them why spiritual experiences were just as valid as actual evidence. So I'm excited to basically talk about why I no longer necessarily see it that simply. I think the other thing I'd say right here at the beginning is that Austin will frame the chapter mostly as how do critics explain these spiritual experiences away. And one of the things I think you and I both agree on is nothing needs to be explained away here. I think the experiences that I once would have called spiritual experiences or spiritual experiences that validated Mormonism for me, I still recognize that I had those experiences. Today, I just recognize them as part of kind of a universal human experience in line with what you just said, introductory as well.
Very good. Well, let's go ahead and get to the slides because I know I've got a lot of things to say, but I'll say it when my slide tells me to say it.
Perfect. I had this
slide I made, so I'm kind of directing myself. Previously on RFM, is there anything you wanted to talk about with this slide, Kolby?
Well, I just wanted to introduce this next clip because last episode we talked about temples and Freemasonry, and we poked a little bit of fun at apologist Don Bradley, where we were talking about Austin was using Don Bradley's Lost 116 Pages book to basically say the Book of Mormon has all these connections, including the Lost 116 Pages, have all these connections to the LDS temple experience that you can see as evidence. And we were kind of criticizing me more than you.
I was almost on the verge of making a little bit of fun of Don, and I apologize for that, but still.
Yeah, and we were just pointing out kind of a methodology that Don uses where he finds things, he finds hits and finds things profound that I truly kind of look at it and I'm like, how are you getting from A to B? And it's
almost like a deepity.
It's almost like a deepity.
Can you explain that for our audience? Because I learned it from you this week, actually.
Yeah. Deepity is a phrase popularized by one of the four horsemen of the new atheist movement, Dan Dennett, who passed last year. And Dan, the way the phrase is defined basically is a deepity is a statement that you'll hear. I saw one on Reddit this week that was perfect. And in fact, someone, because we had pointed it out on Wednesday, tagged me in this comment on Reddit saying, is this an example of a deepity? And I was like, it's a perfect example. They said the believer was saying to this person, I found that every time I dig deeper, I find living water. And that's a deepity. A deepity is a phrase that to the extent it is true, it is trivially true. And to the extent it is profound, it is false. And so that's kind of the phrase.
Whenever I go to the temple, I learn something new?
I think that's not even necessarily a deepity. I think that's kind of just
wishful thinking.
Trying to wish that into existence. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, we were kind of poking fun at Don's methodology where he sees hits that I'm like, I don't understand how you got there. And then like the very next day,
I talked about how smart he is, and that my feeling is that sometimes you can be so smart that you can see things that aren't even there. You can make connections that don't exist.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great connection there with the term deepity. And so I saw this clip just like the day after, and I was sitting there going, okay, I feel a little bit better about that criticism.
I know. So we're going to show it to everybody so we can give you an example of what it is we're talking about. It's not the exact things we were talking about, but it's something related. No, that's pretty darn close. Yeah. Actually, I think this is First Vision stuff.
Yeah.
This is translation of the Book of Mormon stuff and how the translation of the Book of Mormon relates to and is similar to and betokens and presages and all these other words, the Mormon temple. How could Joseph Smith have known? It's like the temple was in existence from the very inception of Mormonism, at least if you go along with these kinds of connections. So we've got this connection. We'll play it, and let's see what you think about it. Okay, everybody? Here we go.
Because, get this. You know the whole thing about Joseph Smith using his hat while he's translating?
Was his hat made out of badger skin?
Beaver skin. I looked to see what the hat was made of after I was examining this account. And we have one statement that says it was a beaver skin hat. So Joseph is actually following the pattern that's in this narrative, lost narrative from the Book of Mormon. He's using the seeing instrument, and he's covering his face with an animal skin. And that is echoing when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai and his face is shining because of the glory of God. He covers his face. The tabernacle was covered with animal skins, badger skins. The sacred relics, when they're being transported, or temple relics, are being covered in badger skins. When Joseph himself has a sacred object, he's wrapping it in a similar thing, a beaver skin.
And an animal skin would be symbolic of like the veil.
Yep. Everybody wants on that old deepity bandwagon, don't they?
Woo.
So here, this is a bit complicated, and I'm not sure I'm going to unpack it all. And I'll just let you bask in the glory of this this depth of knowledge, this evidence that Mormonism is true, which is apparently there's some story about having some stone wrapped in a badger skin, and he thinks that was in the 116 pages. And then he's going to liken that to Joseph Smith using his seer stone and putting it in a beaver skin hat to translate. What could be more similar?
Yeah, I just also think it's also funny that he's like, well, there's one account that describes it as a beaver skin.
Right.
That's interesting to me because I know that Don probably wouldn't accept one account of something that was critical of Joseph Smith, but when he needs it to make his argument and find this connection, it's interesting how he'll take that for solid evidence. I just have never heard anyone find such a deep connection in a beaver skin hat on the American frontier. Who could have imagined that he could have had a beaver skin hat?
It's an amazing thing. And actually what he's aiming for is badger skin, but apparently it's close enough for government work. It's a small burrowing rodent kind of thing. Well, it's large for a rodent, right? And they both start with the same letter of B. So what more do you want, really, Kolby?
Oh, and B is the second letter of the alphabet. The second letter of the alphabet connects to Bar, Baal, Sheet, Elohim. See how you can do this? You can do this all day.
Well, and the second letter of the alphabet stands for the Son of God because he's the second member of the Godhead.
There you go. Even better.
I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, enough with Don. Don, we wish you well. And but that's an example of what it was we were talking about before, and things that we don't find particularly persuasive as far as argumentation for Mormonism. Okay. I mean, Don has some better things that he said, definitely. And this is not representative of all of his work, but it's representative of the kind of work that we were talking about last week. So let me get this off the stage, and we'll go back to the slideshow. And now we're into the actual text of the Light on Truth letter itself by Austin 5.
Yep. This is right after the chapter heading here. Do you want to read this? You're muted.
Sure thing. This is Austin speaking, talking about his own experience. When I debated, or at least what is purported to be his own experience, when I debated whether to leave the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You can never leave the church because you can never say the name. It's too long. By the time you say, I want to leave the Church of Jesus Christ of you've died of old age. That's part of the plan, I think. Two things concern me if I left. There's two things that concern me. Let's see if any of them are losing his wife and family. The first was the Book of Mormon. The second was several powerful spiritual experiences I had had over the years. If I was honest with myself, I could not adequately explain them. I knew critics minimized the spirit as just personal feelings manifesting themselves. Perhaps that would explain some of what I had been through, but certainly not all. Critics of the church who criticize, well, that's what we do, it's in the name. Critics of the church who criticize the invitation from missionaries, church leaders, and the Book of Mormon to pray and ask God for the truth of all things must explain spiritual experiences away. See, that's what you've got to do. I know you've got a slide on this right afterward. Mm-hmm. Secularists attempt to rationalize a testimony from the Holy Ghost with counter neurological and psychological explanations.
So the first thing I wanted to say as we look at this slide is, one, it's just a personal pet peeve of mine when people use a term like secularists. Because really, when they're talking about secularists, all they're really talking about is people who don't accept the explanation of magic or the supernatural. We don't have a word for people who don't believe in the tooth fairy or people who no longer. Well, actually, we do have
adults.
That's what. Damn it! You stole my joke, RFM.
I'm
That's
sorry.
exactly
When
what I
you
was
set it
gonna
up
say.
and you made me think of it. What is the word?
I was gonna say we also don't have a word for people who no longer believe in Santa Claus. Actually, I guess we do. The word is adult. But yeah, the first thing here, aside from that, is no one has to explain anything away. I don't want people to understand or take away from this episode that we're attempting to explain these experiences away. We're trying to contextualize them in the things we know about human psychology, but that's not to say that they didn't happen to you.
Mhm.
I wouldn't say that about my spiritual experiences. I know for a fact you wouldn't say that about your previous spiritual experiences because we talked about some of those things.
I would go further. My spiritual experiences, the ones that I've had that I think of as being more than simply an induced euphoric state,
Mhm.
are things that I carry with me to this day. I do not deny them. I've never denied them, not for fear that I will offend some being and condemn myself to eternal flames, but because they're part of me. And they are so real, I could not tell you, even at this time or when it happened, whether this is coming from inside of me or outside of me. All I can tell you is that it seemed to be coming from outside of me. And yet we'll talk about not the spiritual experiences themselves, because that would be a different episode, but what I've done, and I know you're going to talk about what you've done to deal with and resolve and incorporate your spiritual experiences into the seamless whole of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you'll move to the next slide, I highlighted in red there this "you must explain it away," and I created this cute little claymation referee who will actually pop up a few times during this episode, and I'm going to use them going forward when we're pointing out Austin's use of logical fallacies that he himself criticized in his first chapter. I actually didn't check if he has shifted the burden of proof in the first chapter. I know he has one of the ones later, but shift of the burden of proof logical fallacy happens when you're doing exactly what Austin just did there, saying that people have to explain something away or they must believe your claim. That's just not the way that claims and evidence work. That's not the way critical thinking works. That's not the way logic works. The real question, and I think my purpose in today's episode, is to really ask the question, let's accept the validity of spiritual experiences in the sense that they happen to people, and they happen to people across all different types of faith systems. The question to me is, can spiritual experiences be used as evidence that those spiritual experiences validate some underlying claim about reality? That to me is the question, and that to me is the way that Austin's trying to fallaciously shift the burden of proof onto people to explain things away that don't have to be explained away at all. The claim is, can the people who have had those spiritual experiences show in some way that they bear some relationship to reality? And we're going to show some pretty solid reasons why you really can't take them that way. That's, again, not to say these spiritual experiences aren't meaningful, valuable, or don't happen. It's just to say that they occur and they may have nothing to do with reality or claims about reality.
Well, guess what? Here's a shocker for you. Ready for this one?
I'm ready.
Okay, I'm taking this one off the stage for a second. Here's the letter, and it's hard. Let me see if I can get this any bigger, because he does have it right there. It says, shifting the burden of proof. This is in chapter 1 of Austin 5 Slide on Truth letter, before he writes this 11th chapter, which deals in shifting the burden of the proof. And as he's argued for that in several of his chapters, the irony, of course, being that he's identified this in his first chapter as one of the logical fallacies that critics of the church use. He himself appears to be quite adept. Shifting the burden of proof, he defines in chapter 1 as making a claim that needs evidence, then shifting the responsibility for disproof of that claim to another party. Good job, Austin.
He could have just used, for his middle column there where he's got the example, he could have just copied and pasted his own work right in there.
He absolutely could have, and saved AI a lot of trouble, because I'm convinced AI wrote this letter. Oh, his example was Brigham Young conspired to get Joseph Smith killed. Prove that I'm wrong.
Yeah, my spiritual experiences happened. Now explain those away. It's exactly the same logic pattern.
Right, and we're supposed to explain away his spiritual experiences. I mean, come on. That's even worse, I think, in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're taking it out of the realm of things that are even demonstrable.
Mm-hmm.
much less undemonstrable or demonstrable that it didn't happen. So I'll get this off the screen. What a great idea for you to have me look in Austin 5's chapter to see if actually he committed the same logical fallacy or defined the same logical fallacy that he commits, which he has a habit of doing. All right, let's go to the next one. If you're done with this one.
Yep.
Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit. I inserted a few slides. The straw man, okay? This is a straw man. Critics of the church must explain spiritual experiences away. Now, it's a shifting of the burden of proof, as you said, but it's also a straw man because we don't have to explain spiritual experiences away. Like I said, I don't explain away my spiritual experiences. Although, okay, I am aware of many Mormons who borne testimony, both to me personally as well as publicly on fast and testimony meeting, who appear to have testimonies that consist of heightened emotion experiences frequently held at or occurring at a group of Latter-day Saints, like at young men or young women or both of them together.
Yeah, or like EFY.
Especially for you. I'm sorry?
I was going to say, or like EFY. When I think
Yes.
about this first category that you're talking about, when I was like 14, 15, I would go to EFY for a week down at BYU. And I remember I think the first year I went, I was 14. And one of the most powerful spiritual experiences I had had at that time to date would have been when we sang as a group that there's like this medley that the youth would sing sometimes. The sisters sing as Sisters in Zion. The young men sing We Are As an Army of Helaman, and everybody's holding hands and swaying. Like, I'm literally describing what happened. We were holding hands, swaying, and you're overcome with really, really strong emotion. I wouldn't even today characterize that as a real spiritual experience. That's just something that happens when you've got music, you've got people all connected, you're kind of there in a common purpose. Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder, but that's exactly what I had in mind. You're muted.
I appreciate that. Because you've been there and done that. As you know, I joined the church when I was 18. So there were still some experiences, but a lot of them I've heard about from especially for youth and other stake or ward youth activities, where the idea is to get people together and to create an experience, to create an atmosphere in which spiritual experiences will be held or had. And then usually capping it off with a fast and testimony meeting so people can share their spiritual experiences that they've had at EFY, which of course puts the additional pressure that you're going to have one.
Mm-hmm.
So you can bear testimony about it. And if you don't you feel silly being the only one who's not bearing testimony about it. Because look, all your friends are bearing testimony about the wonderful spiritual experiences they've had at EFY. So like I say, I think that
let me give one more example that my sister shared with me one time.
Okay.
And kind of show how this works. Because you're talking about and when I say manipulation, I don't mean like coercive manipulation. I don't mean anything untoward. I just mean that it's in part a manufactured experience. One that my sister shared with me that our ward had done when she was growing up was at girls' camp. They had every girl's parents both write them a letter about, how they felt about their daughters. And then after all these girls read these letters, they had a testimony meeting. And I remember my sister describing it to me. She couldn't even describe it without breaking out into tears. And I look at that today and I'm like, well, yeah, no, duh. You've got a bunch of people sitting there reading the most important, like they're reading these really heartfelt letters from the most important people to them at that time when they're also struggling with their self-identity. And then you've got them all gathered together, sharing how they feel in a very intimate, safe setting. Like, it's no wonder that experience is going to be super meaningful. You could recreate that with any type of community. It really doesn't have anything to do with Mormonism explicitly.
Right, but it's being held at a Mormon function.
Right.
You're having the experience, and then you're being told what it means, because everybody knows exactly what this means. You're told that whatever the experience, whatever the situation or circumstance, if you have some kind of a spiritual experience, it means the church is true. It doesn't mean, you love your mom and your dad, and you're feeling very emotionally connected to them because you're reading a letter from them for the first time in front of all your friends about how wonderful you are.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's the church is true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let me go to the next point that I had on that slide. After saying that those kind of spiritual experiences, I think, should be discounted. You don't have to. It's up to you. But I can see why people would say, yeah, I think that was manufactured. That was a good word that you used, Kolby, manufactured. Number two, but speaking for myself, other spiritual experiences don't have to be dismissed, and I don't dismiss them. In fact, I got a text, and I've spoken about this elsewhere. It was in the last few months. It was actually my birthday, so it was in March, 5 months ago, from my friend, my best friend in high school, Bruce, who baptized me. And he knows that I'm Radio Free Mormon. He knows that he's not. He stayed with the church. Of course, I'm sure he is concerned that he baptized the equivalent of Frankenstein's monster into the church. He didn't know it at the time, but look what happened. And he's to blame. I hope he can live with that. But he was talking to me about this. It was one of the first times we've talked about it because it's kind of been this unspoken thing between us. He doesn't want to bring it up. I don't want to bring it up. Let's just, be old friends. So he brought it up, though, and he said, I thought about what it is I could say to you, but then the gospel much better than I do. He's speaking to me. And you've had many more spiritual experiences than I have, and your spiritual experiences have been much greater than mine. And he only knows a few of them. And both of those things are probably true. At least they're true from his perspective, and I think he would know. So he says, so I don't know what to say to you. How do I talk to a guy who's had better spiritual experiences or bigger spiritual experiences than I've had, and who knows the gospel better than I do? How do I talk to that guy to get him to come back to the church? I think that's what he was expressing, which is interesting. And I'm glad he told me that. But it's also interesting because it indicates the two avenues or the two approaches that he would normally use to try and talk to somebody in my situation, which is talking about the gospel and talking about those spiritual experiences. Have you ever heard of anybody talk to you, Kolby, about spiritual experiences, yours specifically, in an attempt to try and get you back to church?
Oh, that's a great question. No, I don't believe so. Honestly, I think it's funny you asked that question because I had I only left the church 3.5 years ago. And my mom recently told me she had a conversation with one of my cousins, much younger than me, but that had raised with her, but not with me, like wanting to talk about spiritual experiences or wanted to talk about church issues. But for some reason, I think people are kind of afraid, and I don't mean this in like a self-aggrandizing way. I just mean I think people are kind of afraid to talk to me about the church, which is odd because I would not belittle or criticize their experience or import my experience onto theirs. Maybe when I was fresher out, I would have been a little bit more dogmatic about that. But today I feel like I've softened a lot towards believers who are still making it work. The only time I think I get really difficult about it is if we're going to have a truth claims type conversation. As you know, as we've done this series, I know this stuff pretty well, and I'm not going to pull any punches if we're actually having a truth claim type evidence-based discussion. But that's also not me saying that people have to reach the same conclusion I did, kind of like we did on Wednesday when I was asking some questions of Jim Bennett on Nahum. I always just kind of look at it like this is the way I understand the evidence. What am I missing here? Like, how is my conclusion not the most reasonable, obvious one? And when I have had those conversations, which I have had a few of those, it's then that people try and go to their spiritual experiences. And then I never really know what to do with those, except for say like, well, thanks for sharing that with me, but it doesn't really do anything for me. I've had experiences like that too. I've shared this, I know, with you before, including the fact that when I was first considering like leaving the church, I had a very powerful dream where I had an interview, basically like an interview, like an afterlife interview with Jesus Christ in this dream, where he told me that while the church wasn't true, weirdly in this dream, Christ was like talking to me in like a police interrogation room. I guess that's the way I was looking at the
I
afterlife.
hope it was a soft interrogation room.
It was a soft interrogation room. It was almost like a corporate. It had like that weird corporate bland taupe color. And Jesus was also in a suit. So it was definitely Mormon Jesus. and he basically sat down, had a file, which must have been like the entirety of my life, and said, you know, I hate to tell you this, but it was all true. And I said, like, really? Like, Helen Mar Kimball, like, it was all true? Like, Joseph Smith was really a prophet? And I'll never forget, like, in the dream, he said, well, it wasn't true in the way you were taught it was true. Let me tell you, like, the ways it was true. And that dream was such a foundational experience for me in the middle of my faith crisis, or while I was considering leaving the church, that I just, what I took from that experience was not that it was like a literal vision. It was that my subconscious was working through its issues. And what I took from the dream was that I was relying on the best information I had, and that I could stand in front of like this ideal of Jesus Christ that I had at the end of my life and say, like, I did the best I could with the information I had, and I will never feel bad or guilty about that. I knew that, I guess what I'm saying was that experience confirmed to me how pure my search for truth was and how pure my heart was in the conclusion I had reached.
Very nice. You're the only guy I know who not only would debate Jesus, but you'd win the debate.
I didn't say that, but
you got him to change his mind. Well, let me tell you, okay, how it's true. That's when you win the debate, when the guy changes the subject. Very interesting. Okay, so let me see here. I'm going back to my outline. Okay, so I talked about my friend Bruce's recent text about spiritual experiences and stuff like that. By the way, that's not meant to brag. I think that maybe there are people who are more prone to having spiritual experiences. I don't know. All I know is I had a lot of them, especially when I was a new member of the church. I am going to have to do a chapter in my book about that, and maybe a podcast about it at some time. I've talked about some of them, but never all of them in one place. Okay. I gave a presentation on this very subject in St. George back in January of 2020, right before COVID broke out. And it is still on the RFM website, and it's talking about resolving spiritual experiences. And I went back and I re-listened to that. It has been over 5 years now since I gave it. I thought it was an important subject, especially for Mormons, because this is what happens. When I asked you, Kolby, about whether anybody had talked to you about your spiritual experiences as a reason for going back to church, this is a very common tactic amongst Mormons. And I think that's what Bruce was intimating to me that he would have used on me, right? Which is, okay, look, you've had these spiritual experiences. Think back to when you had those spiritual experiences and remember that the church is still true and go back to church. And that's how Mormons will a lot of times use your spiritual experiences against you. But you've never had that happen to you, right, Kolby?
not that I can remember. No, I don't think so.
But you've heard of it happening a lot. Sure.
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite things to do is to peruse the ex-Mormon Reddit and see the text threads that people share from like their family members where this exactly happens. Like, you know that you have a testimony of the Book of Mormon.
Yes. Yeah. People get very, very insecure when another faithful member of the church stops being so faithful and starts losing their testimony because it puts you at risk, right?
Yeah, and I think that may be one reason, RFM, that I really haven't experienced that, because, and probably one reason that Bruce sent you that message, because I mean, I'm thinking about this from people in my life who would try and do that, right? I served a mission. I taught at the MTC. I worked for BYU's Ancient Scripture Department for Tom Waymet. I taught gospel doctrine for all 4 years. I was really close friends with a sealer that I met on my mission. Like, I think one of the reasons people probably haven't done that to me is like, they probably know that I know as well as they do that I had those experiences, and they probably are a little afraid to have that conversation of how I have reconciled with those things. That would be the reason I would think it hasn't happened to me, while it does happen to some other people, and probably why it hasn't happened to you very much, is people probably know, like, I'm going to talk to this guy about how he's forgotten his testimony. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
No, people come to you and people come to me when they want to know what's really going on with Mormonism. But most Mormons who are not at that point yet, they don't want to know what's wrong with Mormonism. They're happy thinking there's nothing wrong with Mormonism. They know that Kolby and or RFM have left the church or stopped going to church. So apparently they found out something about Mormonism that strikes them as wrong enough to stop going to church, and they don't want to know what it is. With the result that a person in my shoes or your shoes ends up being largely radioactive to most of the active members that they used to know. Has that been your experience, Kolby?
Absolutely. The only people that I only knew through church, I have lost contact with all of them, even though I would be completely fine maintaining those friendships. The only Mormons that I still have contact with are obviously friends that I've known for a really long time, family members, or coworkers that we have other things in common.
All right, so let's go ahead to my presentation, St. George, January of 2020. And I said a number of things there. I refer you to that if you want to listen to it. It's a little over an hour long. It's pretty good. It's the actual recording of the event itself. So there's some background noise, and I like that actually because it's a little bit more real. But one of the things I say is that there's a distinction between the spiritual experience itself, right? There's a distinction, and these are things I learned later on, because the church wants you to have spiritual experiences. They will have meetings, EFY, conferences in which they try to evoke spiritual experiences. And then they will tell you what the interpretation of that spiritual experience is, which is the church's truth. There is a distinction that should be kept in mind between the experience itself and the definition of the experience. Because typically in Mormonism, the church tells you not only that you should have spiritual experiences and encourages you to have spiritual experiences, but tells you what the meaning and the definition of those spiritual experiences are. And in retrospect, as I moved along through life in Mormonism, I began to realize that even though I thought all these spiritual experiences meant that Mormonism was true, that the experience really was mine. The experience didn't belong to Mormonism or President Nelson or anybody else in the church. It was my spiritual experience, and the definition of that experience should be rightfully, largely up to me. So a distinction in the mind between the experience itself and the definition of that experience. Now, I've got two experiences that happened to me. It happened to me when I was in my 20s, after my mission, where I had spiritual experiences where it's very difficult for me to define these as the church is true. Of course, when I'm reading the Book of Mormon and having these incredible spiritual experiences, that's easy, right? If the Book of Mormon is true, then, the LDS church is true, or so I was taught at the time and believed. But there were two things that happened. One thing that happened, I'm going to abbreviate these stories. If you want the full story, go listen to the talk at RFM. One of them had to do with reading a book full of essays for college at UT as an undergrad. And this book had, amongst many things and many essays in it, it had an entry from Martin Luther King Jr. titled Letter from a Birmingham Jail. Have you read that?
I have.
Well, I had to read this because it was for school, but I read it begrudgingly. Everything else I read okay, but this is by Martin Luther King Jr., whom I had been taught by Ezra Taft Benson, and whose books I had read, such as An Enemy Hath Done This, that Martin Luther King Jr. is not someone who should be listened to, that he was a Marxist agitator, and that I shouldn't believe anything he says. So this is how I'm coming to it with Martin Luther King Jr. as a devout, observant, and believing Mormon in the early 1980s. And the thing I was shocked by, now you can understand, okay, if I'm reading any of these secular materials and I have a spiritual experience while I'm reading it, I'm going to be shocked by it.
Right.
But Martin Luther King Jr., are you kidding me? The Antichrist, or at least, his brother-in-law? And I'm having this spiritual experience reading Letter from a Birmingham Jail, and I'm going, oh my gosh, what the hell do I do with this? Because the spiritual experience was exactly the same as the spiritual experience I had in so many other ways. Not everything. There's a variety of spiritual experiences, to coin a term. Inside joke. But a lot of them are that. That was how I would identify the spirit and feeling the spirit, the same spirit I felt when reading this.
Right.
And I thought, okay, how do I make this mean the church is true? Because now that I've experiencing this, a Mormon typically thinks I've got to interpret it, and we know what the interpretation is supposed to be. So how am I supposed to cram this square peg into this round hole?
That's so interesting, because this is the exact, what you're describing here is the exact reason I included that clip from Lord of the Rings, which we won't be able to play. It was the same exact experience of feeling the exact same feeling I felt confirming the truth of the Book of Mormon when I think we'll have a little screenshot of it, but it's the part in Return of the King when King Theoden and the riders of Rohan go out to save the people of Gondor.
The Rohirrim.
Yeah, on the fields of Pelennor. And he gives this great speech. It's second only maybe to Bill Pullman's speech in Independence Day for great movie speeches. And then they ride down the hill, and it's this great inspiring moment. The music, the Howard Shore music is swelling.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about how I process those experiences is I actually didn't try and make them necessarily mean or try and fit them into this route of how does this help mean the church is true. The way my brain worked was I would look at the teaching in Doctrine and Covenants 93 that says that truth is independent in the sphere in which God has placed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, well, there's some truth here that's being communicated, and that's okay, even though it's outside of the church. That's where I would go.
That's what I tried to do. I tried to talk about, I don't know, justice or equality or whatever the hell it was that Martin Luther King Jr. was writing about, and trying to make that into a principle. Okay. Obviously it's principle, but make it into a principle that fits within Mormonism, and therefore get there. You know, this is testifying that Mormonism is true. I just have to go through a little bit of a circuitous route to get there.
It's interesting. We have that same parallel experience. I made it about sacrifice for King Theoden and his friends.
Yes. Well, hopefully he'll be able to, what is it? What is it about his fathers? What's his last line? That'll be able to be honored there or something among his fathers.
Yeah, like in the halls of his fathers. They kind
halls of his fathers. I had a friend who was a member of the state presidency at the time who was in a puddle of tears over this. He felt the spirit so strong at that part. I don't know if he had any difficulties or even had this thought process that we have gone through. Now, the second time this happened was even harder than Martin Luther King Jr. And it's still while I'm an undergrad student. And as a dance major, I've got an assignment. I've got to go and watch this dance performance by the North Carolina Modern Dance Company, who I've never heard of, but they're in town and they're touring and they're over here at this theater on campus. And I got to go watch it, which I never would have done otherwise because I really, really don't like modern dance. I had to take modern dance. Sorry, Sharon. I really don't like modern dance. Sharon Vasquez was one of my teachers. She's a wonderful person. Incredibly talented. It just wasn't my thing. Okay. But I've got to go see this because I got to write a paper on it. So I think I go with a couple of other people. So at least I won't be alone in my misery. And I'm watching this modern dance performance, and I'm watching it and I'm just going, what am I going to write about this? And all of a sudden they're doing this dance up there. Now, modern, it doesn't mean a thing. Now, maybe it does mean something in the eye of the choreographer. Okay. But it's a rare thing when it gets passed on to the audience. At least for me. So shocked, I tell you, to feel the spirit while I'm watching this modern dance performance. Once again, the spirit shows up in the damnedest places. It can be very inconvenient. Now, when you're reading the Book of Mormon and praying about it to know if it's true, that's when the spirit's supposed to show up. Okay, we know it's supposed to show up, but then it starts showing up in strange places where it's not expected. It's really not wanted. Because what do I do with that now? Now, how do I make this mean Mormonism is true? And so I went somewhere with, I don't know, beauty. I hate modern dance, but beauty. So beauty is a positive thing. So maybe it's testifying to be. I got no idea how to make that work. So I just I had the experience. I sort of left it away, left that experience in a little pocket universe so I wouldn't have to deal with it very much. But later on, when I was thinking back on it, then it started making a little bit more sense that I can have these experiences in areas that are not church related. And that doesn't mean that I'm not having these experiences or that they are not in some way similar to, if not equivalent to, many of the experiences I have in Mormonism that I've interpreted as the church is true. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a great example of exactly the type of, I know when I had experiences like that, because you've given two, I've given one. And I know there are other examples I could come up with if I racked my brains. But I remember feeling, like you said, placing it in that pocket universe, that's how we deal with cognitive dissonance over going, what does this mean? This is confusing from my worldview. That's a great way to describe the thing we do with cognitive dissonance, or the metaphor that's been used before, first by Camilla Irene Kimball, placing it on the shelf. That's exactly what it is. That's how we deal with cognitive dissonance, is we don't think about it.
I got this expression from the latest Superman movie,
Mm-hmm.
the old pocket universe. Can you believe that I'm making a DC reference there?
It was a pretty
Okay,
good
that's for the plebes in the audience. So anyway, the next thing is this, and I'm almost done with these experiences, okay?
No,
But I think it's
great.
very important that I get
Yeah.
through them. These are 2 experiences that I had that were very hard to make fit into the template of the church is true. Now, this reminds me of this. And I'm going to go to the next slide, I believe. Actually, let me take it off here. I can preview it below. Yes, and I'll put it on the stage. So back in the early 70s, we had this wonderful TV show. It was called Kung Fu. Ever see it, Kolby?
Nope.
Well, this is where the famous expression, snatch the pebble from my hand, comes from. And this is something that's so well known. One of the reasons is because it's a very famous, it was very popular. And I believe they recreated the origin story of Kwai Chang Caine, that little kid who's going to grow up and become David Carradine.
Let me just connect to something we've talked about in this series earlier. I know about this phrase, I know about this scene, but I had no idea where it came from. We've talked about this before when it comes to meme theory, right? Which is, this is how ideas are repurposed, repackaged. They pass down where we may not even be aware of the original reference.
Wow. I didn't know that you didn't know where it came from. But of course, doesn't everybody know this? Snatch the pebble from my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then you've got Kung Fu Panda, which has basically taken a lot of the elements. It's sort of based on Kung Fu.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of nods to it. I've never seen it, but I expect they got to say that in there somewhere, right? Have you seen Kung Fu Panda?
Yeah, I have. In fact, my sister-in-law, when my wife and I were engaged, my sister-in-law was dating this guy, and this goes perfectly with the theme of this episode too. She was dating this guy, my sister-in-law was. We went out to like ice cream or yogurt or something with them, and he told us like a 20-minute experience about how Kung Fu Panda to him had all these connections to the temple endowment, and it was a super spiritual experience for him to go see Kung Fu Panda. And I remember my wife and I, full believers at the time, right, about to get married in the temple, we as we get back in the car after, we're like, that guy's crazy. Kung Fu Panda the temple. And it's like, this is exactly what we're talking about. People find these connections all over the place because different things resonate with different people.
I got to tell you, I'm still convinced that E.T. has all these elements as a representative of Jesus Christ and the story of Jesus Christ, with E.T. playing the title role. And I thought that even at the time it came out, and I went back and saw it a number of times. This is when you had to go back to the theater to watch something. And I did. And I told a friend of mine, Ronnie Garcia, that it was as spiritual to me as the temple endowment. And she thought that I was, oh my gosh, I was crazy about that. I'm not going to go into the details. I will say that on the other side of the equation, Steven Spielberg himself, not a noted Christian, gave an interview in which he had heard about this, not from me, but apparently it was a thing. Okay. And he'd heard about this, and his only response was, well, all I can tell you is that as a Jewish person, I didn't intentionally put anything in there about Jesus Christ. I mean, I don't know what you're getting from it. And God bless you if you get something of value to you from it. I didn't put it in there.
And it's because the overarching narrative, right, in line with what we talked about with the finding these temple connections, if you abstract things just enough, you can find connections between so many things that really aren't related. To the Spielberg comment, it kind of reminds me of my favorite scene in the movie Heretic, where Mr. Reed has the sister missionaries in his little chapel, and he's explaining these archetypes and how these archetypes evolve and this idea of iteration.
Like Monopoly?
He does it with Monopoly, but he also does it with different religious figures, right? He does it with Horus. He does it with Osiris. He does it with religions from all across the world. And some of that's more accurate than other parts of it. But the idea of iteration and of finding these connections when we zoom out just enough, I think is very important for people to understand. You are muted again.
Very, very good.
The hat
So let me
trick.
talk a little bit about the Snatch the Pebble from My Hand grasshopper, okay? It is replayed at the beginning, as I recall, of every episode, which is another reason everybody knows it. It's not just played in the first episode and then that you know, all the other episodes follow with no more mention of it.
Mm-hmm.
Every episode starts with the origin story of little Kwai Chang Caine, who here looks kind of like Brandon Cruz. I'm not sure if that's Brandon Cruz. It could be the little boy from the courtship of Eddie's father. You know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a young Kwai Chang Caine. And Snatch the Pebble from My Hand is what Master Po tells him. The idea is, of course, Master Po, who is the master, that's why they call him Master Po, holds out a pebble in his hand. And when little Kwai Chang Caine or bigger Kwai Chang Caine, when he can finally snatch the pebble from his hand, then it's time for you to go. Because that's the rest of the expression. Snatch the pebble from my hand, then it will be time for you to go. Which means that when Kwai Chang Caine's skill level is enough to be able to grab the pebble before Master Po closes his hand on it, right? When he's faster than the master, then it will be time for you to go. Not just that you can go, but basically you got to go at that point. And the entire representation is one of, once you've learned everything that I have to teach you, and you are actually even surpassing me by a hair as the master, it is time for you to go, because that is what the good teacher, that is what the true teacher will always do for their student.
Mm-hmm.
Which is when they have taught them everything that the student can learn from this master, and the master has nothing more to teach, the good teacher lets the student go so the student can continue to grow with another master. The bad master, the bad teacher, holds on to the student for whatever reason. And I think we've all had experiences, maybe both ways in our lives, in one way or another. But the bad teacher holds on to the student for personal reasons, for personal, for private, for selfish reasons, whatever they may be. And I had an example like this. Of course, I'm going to be relating this to the church. But my example on this is that when I was, this was when I was in law school, and I'm trying to make some money, and I've got a job. I can't remember how I came into this job, but I was tutoring this young kid, 13, 14, 15, in magic. Perfect. I love magic. I know a lot of magic. I'm teaching this kid magic over at his house in Austin, where I would drive once a week, one evening a week for an hour, teach him whatever it was I had planned to teach him, get paid quite well by his family for an hour, and did this for a number of weeks. I mean, months. But the time came when I started running out of things to teach this kid. He was quite adept. He paid a lot of attention, and he practiced. And I got to the point finally where I really didn't have anything to teach him, but I wanted that paycheck every week. I wanted that extra spending money. So I remember thinking, okay, look, I could keep going back here indefinitely and just sort of recycling the same old stuff and getting paid for it. But really, this kid's learned everything I have to teach him. So what I did was I told him and his parents, I said, look, your kid's amazing. He's learned basically everything I have to teach him, and he needs to go on and continue to learn from somebody else who knows things that I don't know. And I remember that experience. I could have done it differently. I chose to do it the way I did. I think that's because I was a good Mormon. What do you think, Kolby?
Yeah, or just a person of integrity. Sure.
Maybe, because Mormonism, this is the problem with Mormonism, I think. Mormonism was great for me for the first 7 to 10 years. And I had learned everything that Mormonism had to teach me. But Mormonism would not let me go. It insisted that it was the only place that had the truth, and that I had to stay in that school, in that monastery, instead of the Shaolin monastery. It's the Mormon monastery, for the rest of my life. Even though they had nothing more to teach me, based upon the promise that they did have something more to teach me, and that meat would be forthcoming at some undefined point in the future after I had gotten done consuming all the milk, which I had consumed a million times over by now, and it was starting to get a bit sour in my stomach. Your thoughts, Kolby?
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me in two ways. First is that I've always had a passion for teaching. When I was in high school, I was a lifeguard and also taught swim lessons. And so I've had that experience where I've had kids that were exceptionally bright, not just swim lessons. I also, for 7 years on and off, have taught as an adjunct, so taught law students. I was also a teaching assistant, like I said, for Tom Wayment. And there's something so magical about the connection between a teacher that really loves teaching and really loves material and a student that really loves learning and really loves asking the good questions. My absolute favorite kids to work with, especially in law school, are the kids who really, really want to understand and like place themselves in what they're learning and how they can either further their skills or further their knowledge of the actual substantive doctrinal principles that we're talking about. Doctrinal in the legal sense, not in the Mormon sense. But I think it's one of those things that it's unsurprising to me that we often feel those types of spiritual experiences in that type of relationship, because I think one of the secret keys to having spiritual experiences, and I might not use the term spiritual today, but what most people would describe as spiritual experiences is there's usually a level of safety and intimacy and earnestness that has to be present for those experiences to happen. And so it's unsurprising to me that you felt those in this, or you see that connection in this this teaching experience you've had, because I've had that as well. You're muted again.
By the way, everybody, just so you know, I'm muted a lot, and I mute myself when Kolby's speaking. We are recording early in the morning. I'm still a little bit froggy, so I'll clear my throat from time to time, but I don't want it to be interrupting Kolby and to be annoying you. And so then Kolby gets done, and I'm excited to make my point, and I forget that I muted myself, and we go through this little dance. Okay. I could leave it unmuted all the time, but believe me, I do it for you, and you're welcome. So you've had this experience. So here's the insight that came to me that wasn't part of that talk before when I gave it originally, is that all of a sudden it occurred to me, the entire Elder Poelman fiasco from October of 1984, right? We'll talk about it here in a second. He's the GA who went up, gave his talk, and it was so not well received by the powers that be that he had to go into the tabernacle the next day, maybe, certainly following it, and give a revised version of the talk that said the opposite of what it was he said originally, so it could be taped, and then that talk be put in as if it were the original talk in the taped version, the VHS. That's how long ago it was, right? The VHS tape version that got then produced and sent out to all the different ward buildings or stake buildings so people could check it out and listen to conference again by putting the tape in. They substituted his talk for a different talk,
including a cough track. I just have to. It'd be like one thing. I just have to signpost this. It'd be one thing to just have it re-recorded and say nothing about it. That wouldn't necessarily meet like informed disclosure, but it wouldn't be so manipulative and false. But to put in like a cough track and just like rustling sounds behind it is a level of deception that to me is like, if people haven't listened to that whole story, it is truly absurd the level the church went to obfuscate what it did with Poelman's talk.
It is, because the whole thing is that, there's nobody in the tabernacle at this point. It's not packed with people. You don't have the choir behind you, like he did when he gave the original talk, and like everybody else on the tape still does when they're giving their talk. And he's in the middle. So they have to work it in some way to make it look like this is a talk that was given in general conference. And to a large extent, they succeed, but they even have a cough track. They have people coughing in the background like you hear in general conference to make it sound like there's a bunch of people out there. So that was really, really interesting. Now, the thing that came to me is that his talk, Elder Poelman's talk, really was a snatch the pebble from my hand talk. What he says is that the church is wonderful, the church is good, it's got all these incredible programs, but through going to all these programs and through growing personally, we will eventually come to the point where we don't really need the church programs anymore. It's like people are going, you can see him in the sound booth going, what the heck? So they had him change the talk to basically say, no, you will never come to the point where you don't need the church anymore. It is a snatch the pebble from my hand talk, which got turned into a you'll never snatch the pebble from my hand, and don't even try and snatch the pebble from my hand, and stay away from me completely while you're at it. You're never going to leave the Mormon church. This is what it ends up being. So October 7th, 1984 conference talk. This is Ronald E. Poelman. The name of the talk is The Gospel in the Church. This is from wasmormon.org.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if they're correct. I don't know where they got this information that the substitute, the new talk, the better talk, the revised talk was given the next day on October 8th, 1984. And maybe it's true. Obviously, it was done sometime after the first talk, which was October 7th, 1984. And here's the close-up of this. And this is just one paragraph. It's a very important paragraph that was changed. You can see how it was changed and how it is that this is a snatch the pebble talk that then got changed to you're never leaving the Shaolin Monastery. Can you read the October 7th, the original version?
Yeah, thank you for letting me read the good one. As individually and collectively, we increase our knowledge, acceptance, and application of gospel principles. We become less dependent on church programs.
What? We become less dependent on church programs?
Like general
You guys
conference.
going off the rails. Somebody cut the mic. Cut the mic. Go ahead.
Yeah,
please.
less dependent on church programs like general conference. Our lives become gospel-centered. Sometimes traditions, customs, social practices, and personal preferences of individual church members may, through repeated or common usage, be misconstrued as church procedures or policies. Occasionally, such traditions, customs, and practices may even be regarded by some as eternal gospel principles. Under such circumstances, those who do not conform to these cultural standards may mistakenly be regarded as unorthodox or even unworthy. In fact, the eternal principles of the gospel and the divinely inspired church do accommodate a broad spectrum of individual uniqueness and cultural diversity. Well, they've got to get that out of there. That's for sure.
So there's 2 points he's making. First off, you get to the point where if you grow, if you're spiritual, if you really try, you get to the point where you become less dependent on church programs. And the other thing is that the gospel really itself, the kernel of the gospel, is defined so narrowly, and he means it in a good way, that there's a lot of cultural accumulations to the gospel, like barnacles on the hull of a ship that have grown over the years, and a lot of times people mistake the barnacles for the ship, the culture for the gospel.
Yeah.
And actually, the gospel can incorporate and adopt and embrace lots of different cultures within its net. Kolby?
Yeah, the best example I was going to give of like that, I like the use of barnacle there. I think that's a perfect way to understand it. Is there was this talk that Boyd K. Packer gave called The Unwritten Order of Things. And I think what Poelman's basically saying is he's taking the exact antithesis of Boyd K. Packer, basically saying, we do things under this unwritten order. We have all these unofficial rules, but you should follow them. He even specifically says the traditions, customs, and practices may be regarded by some as eternal gospel principles. It's interesting to me. The other thought I had as you were introducing this idea is, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, I had so many mentors and figures that were so formative to me in the church that were like Poelman, the good version of Poelman. And it's interesting that there are those two strains in Mormonism. You have the ones that do truly seem to believe that it's more about the gospel. Usually they're the more Christ-centered folks, in my experience. I think of someone like Tom Wayment, who was so foundational to helping shape the way I lived the gospel, helped me get into law school, helped mentor me at a time I really needed it. And I just would be remiss if I didn't mention that the church does have both of these types of people. It's just always so unfortunate to me that then this October 8th version comes along, the church comes along and needs to insist, no, you need Big Brother.
Right. Well, what else is Big Brother going to say, really? Then you need me. That's what makes him Big Brother.
Mm-hmm.
It's too bad the church can't be Master Poe. So here's what it says. Here's what it was changed to say. What Elder Poelman himself allowed himself to be ordered back into the tabernacle to tape this new talk. We don't know if he changed it or if it was changed for him, but it was definitely changed. And here's how it was changed, okay? This one paragraph. As individually and collectively, we increase our knowledge, acceptance, and application of gospel principles. You can't tell he's a lawyer. We can more effectively utilize the church to make our lives increasingly gospel-centered. Let's see, what is that a change from? We become less dependent on church programs. That's what that's changed from, night and day.
Yep.
And so then it goes on to talk about the culture. The conformity we require should be according to God's standards. Wow, that's a total new thing, isn't it? That's a total add-in.
Yet I know you said it makes it night and day, but I really want to compare the language here for a second to show how much the church made him make the church of the focus, when in the other version he literally says we become less dependent on church programs. The idea being you can move beyond the church. That's the very clear import of what he's saying. And what the church made him edit it to was we can more effectively utilize the church to make our lives increasingly gospel-centered. What the church's version of this talk says is the church will always be the gate through which you access the gospel, which we really know is a stand-in for the atonement of Jesus Christ. That's what they made him say. That's what they edited it to say.
I'm actually reading more down as you're talking, and I'm kind of overwhelmed by what they have him say. This is a walk of shame for Elder Poelman. They have him say, the conformity we require should be according to God's standards. The orthodoxy upon which we insist. They're going to say the same thing twice. The conformity we require and the orthodoxy upon which we insist must be founded in fundamental principles and eternal law. Take that, Elder Poelman. Including free agency and the divine uniqueness of the individual. It is important, therefore, to know the difference between eternal gospel principles, which are unchanging, universally applicable, and cultural norms, which may vary with time and circumstance. That must have been a tough pill for Elder Poelman to swallow. But he remained faithful. I think he passed away not too long ago, firm in the faith and a member of the church.
Yeah, what a complete reversal of the message he was trying to send, which was we can allow for some unorthodoxy or even what some may be regarded as unworthy. And then it flips it around to just be completely the opposite, which is you can have your free agency and you can have your divine uniqueness so long as it fits within our strictures and our authority and our standards.
So long as your free agency is consistent with the conformity we require and the orthodoxy upon which we insist.
Yes. While we're talking about Poelman, I won't say anything more than to say, for those who know that you and I are both lawyers, and the church's law firm is Curtin McConkie. Curtin McConkie used to be Curtin McConkie and Poelman, which wasn't this individual who gave this talk, but it was that individual's brother or relative. People should look at why Curtin McConkie changed his name from Curtin McConkie to Curtin McConkie Poelman.
Good point. Hey, I want to bring up something else, which is a quote that I had come up with. I did some more research on it, and I found out who actually is the originator of the quote. Sometimes it's hard to find out. Sometimes it's impossible. But this one is Muhammad Ali, who said, a man who views the world the same at 50 as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. Such a powerful thought. The truth of which usually all people accept. They may not have thought of it before, but that's what's wonderful about it, is that we recognize this as a truth. I mean, what is life about if you live for 30 years between age 20 and 50 and you view the world the same way as you did at 20? When you're 50, you've wasted 30 years of your life. The reason it struck me so powerfully is because this seems to be what the church wants. It wants all of its members to view the church the same at 50 as they did at 20. I mean, as they did at 8, as they did when they were in primary. And this is part of the eternal infantilization of the members of the church that the leaders of the church impose upon them. Have you ever heard of this quote before?
I haven't, but the principle behind it really connects with me, which is, it's so weird how the grand promise of Mormonism, the best I would say of Joseph Smith's theology, not excusing his unhealthy behaviors, was this idea of eternal progression, that you can literally become like God or can become gods yourselves through access to knowledge and intelligence, right? The glory of God is intelligence. And it's so odd how a religion with that promise then literally has adults using the same manuals as the 2-year-olds in church. We can't understate how ridiculous that truly is in helping illustrate this principle, how it's compromised the grand vision and grand promise of its theology because of this need from the church hierarchy to insist on orthodoxy.
Yeah, one of the experiences I had that really brought that home to me was I was in high priest, so this isn't that long ago, maybe 15 years ago. Whenever it happened, I think you could look it up. But I was in high priest group, and the new year is starting, or the old year is ending, and we're getting the manuals for the upcoming year. And this was at the time when we had been doing the teachings of the presidents of the church manuals, where they take things that certain presidents of the church did or said actually, and they categorize them under all the old standard categories. And then you have, the same thing you've always heard just by this president. They'd run out of them. They'd run out of presidents of the church. They didn't have anything to fill in the gap for the next year while they were ginning something else up. So what they did was they had done a revised version, a light revision, I think, of the investigator's manual for the investigator's class. Gospel Essentials, I think is what it was called. And what they did for that year was the church said to all the high priest groups and elders quorums, they had high priests back then, and they said, what you're going to use as your manual for the entire year is the newly revised investigator's manual, which teaches the gospel at such a basic level, right? In very basic words, it's made for investigators, and I got no problem with it for investigators. I do have a problem with it for high priests, who are usually the older, more seasoned male members of the church who have learned this stuff a long time ago and don't need to be going back to relearning the alphabet. And I remember there was a brother in the high priest. I think he was in the high priest group leadership. And what he said was, well, I guess the leaders at Salt Lake think we need to learn our basics better. And I thought, no, we don't need to learn our basics better. That's you. I didn't say this to him. This is why it struck me. This is you trying to come up with a reason for why it is that they are insulting us by having us go over the new members manual for a year. And at that point, it really struck home that in Mormonism, you never really graduate from primary.
Yeah, and it's built into the doctrine of the church, like in a way that is so insulting. And I understand people who are believers who may listen to this would say, this is just my pride speaking. But let me finish this thought, which is my perspective on this has totally changed, because Mosiah 3:19, right? King Benjamin teaches that the natural man is an enemy to God. And we're taught that we have to submit to God's will and become like little children. And it literally says to submit to whatsoever thing. Well, let me pull it up exactly so I don't.
Even as a child submitteth to his father.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yeah.
This is a seminary scripture, Kolby.
I
You
know.
can't quote this.
But you've gotten in my head because you texted me last night that I had the Acts chapter wrong. So I want to actually read it.
I was right about Acts chapter 10.
I know you were. Take your victory lap. Go ahead.
I didn't bring it up last night because I didn't want to embarrass you.
So this is what it says, Mosiah 3:19. So this is King Benjamin. He says, for the natural man is an enemy to God, and has been from the fall of Adam, and will be forever and ever, unless he yields to the enticings of the Holy Spirit, and putteth off the natural man, and becometh the saint through the atonement of Christ the Lord. And here's the part I really want to underscore. And becometh as a child, submissive, meek, humble, patient, full of love, willing to submit to all things which the Lord seeth fit to inflict upon him, even as a child does submit to his father. I understand there's biblical justification for this as well, right? I think it's from Proverbs that the Lord's ways are so much higher than our ways, we can't even contemplate how much higher he is than us.
Isaiah,
okay, thank you.
It's okay.
But here's where I look at that now with my experience as a father, and I just go, I reject that model of God. I am never going to, my oldest is a boy, and I am never going to expect my son to submit to me whatever I want to do for the rest of his life. It's absurd to view ourselves And this is again where I come back to the self-defeating nature of this theology. The highest promise is we are gods in embryo. We can become like gods, but you really can't if you take these teachings, which the church takes seriously by all the things we've just been talking about, by saying, no, you will always be a child. You always have to be a child. You always have to love Big Brother. I don't see where people can see God as this grand idea, this grand creator of the entire universe, and yet he has to concern himself with us directly following him. Like, what an absurd notion that a being that would be willing and able to do such grand things would care about this level of triviality, this banality of you must do exactly what you're told for eternity. I can think of nothing more that better fits the description of hell than being expected to do whatever you're told to do for eternity. And I know there are people who are believers who will say, that's just your pride speaking, but like, it's not your fault if when you become an adult, you want to become an adult. And whether we're talking literally or we're talking spiritually, you do not have to feel bad for outgrowing this system.
Very good. In fact, it also occurs to me that the LDS Church bills itself as a bus when it is really a bus station. What I mean by that, let me ask you, what do you think I mean by that? Hopefully it's plain enough.
I actually am excited to hear because I'm not sure.
Well, the LDS Church is this bus that's going to take you to the celestial kingdom. You just got to stay on the bus. It's not a bus. It's actually a bus depot. It's a bus station. It's a bus stop. And that's where you're going to stay for the rest of your life because you ain't never leaving that bus station. And if you do, then you will be threatened with being eaten by sharks. You'll be ridiculed. You'll be mocked doing a half gainer off the side of the bus stop and all those kinds of things. So that's what I think. This is my experience, that it's a bus. It's billed as a bus, the LDS Church is, but really it's just a bus depot where you're going to sit for the rest of your life. And God forbid for the rest of eternity. This reminded me, hang on a second here. I got to check this next slide. Okay. This reminded me of this movie. It reminded me of this movie, The Muppets Take Manhattan, which I saw, because when you're a Mormon and you're back from your mission, these are the kind of movies you go out and see, even though you're in your 20s and you're in freaking college. Okay. Because that's all you can go watch. I can't tell you the number of movies that are famous movies from the 80s and the 90s that I have to talk about. People say, yeah, I've never seen that. Well, why didn't you go see that? Because I was a Mormon. I was a good Mormon. So I'm not watching these R-rated movies, okay? Muppets, not R-rated. And this was a really bad Muppet movie, in my opinion, okay? I like the Muppets. But there was one funny line in this entire Muppets Take Manhattan movie. And that's where Kermit goes to work at an advertising agency. And there is this soap they've come up with. It's their client, right? Ocean Breeze soap. So they've got to come up with a slogan for Ocean Breeze soap. And this talks about the difference between advertising cliches or advertising jingles or slogans and the reality of the situation. And this is what made me laugh out loud in the theater when this crazy, bug-eyed guy at the ad agency says his idea for the slogan. Ocean Breeze soap. It's just like taking an ocean cruise, only there's no boat and you don't actually go anywhere. That's Mormonism. Mormonism is like taking a one-way trip to the celestial kingdom, only there's no celestial kingdom and you don't actually go anywhere because you're stuck in the bus depot. Yeah, maybe you had to be there. I don't see you laughing that hard at this.
No, I think it connects perfectly with what we're talking about. Of you don't like we don't expect our literal children to be children forever. They grow up. That's part of life. And it's so odd that the church's model is you never grow up. You're always a child. You always have someone to answer to. You always have someone telling you what to do. And it's not, I guess what I'm trying to underscore is it's not prideful. It's not arrogance to want to grow up. The church needs to let people grow up.
And they take Jesus, who is, I think, at least the way I read Jesus in the New Testament, he is a symbol of liberation to the human spirit, and turn him into a symbol of enslavement to the LDS Church.
Yeah, and
And I
was
don't
going to
think
say,
Mormonism is the only one that does this, but Mormonism does it really, really well.
right. And I was going to say, and that's the interesting thing about it, right? There's scriptures I could quote that show how wrong their approach is. Like Paul literally says, when I was a child, I spake as a child, and when I was a man, I put away childish things. Like you can find both strains of thought in this system. And it's interesting that just like with the Poelman talk, the church is like, pay no attention to those parts. Pay no attention to the parts that talk about eternal growth, talk about outgrowing this system. You're going to be here forever. Like you
So
said,
get
like
used to it.
Yep.
Get comfortable. One more thing I want to say about the bus station analogy is that we know that there's a trip that you're taking, and if it's a long trip, it's broken up into different legs of the trip. We call them legs of the trip, right? You've heard that before? Well, that was terrible. I'm gonna start again. Oh, that's good. I wish I had a monster. I used to be married to one.
I switched to kombucha, so there you go.
Oh, okay. I used to be married to one of those too. I don't even know what that means.
You got to leave that in.
Okay, I'll leave that in. I'll cut the other stuff out. But what
Put
I
it
want
at
to
the
say,
end or something, like a after credits or something.
I don't have that ability. I'm not even that good at this. It's a miracle I can do what I do. So the thing I want to mention about the journey, right, in the bus station is that if you have a long enough trip, and most people's, my journey in this life has been 65 years long, okay? So it's plenty long, and yours will be too, and it has been already. But the thing is this, is that a trip is not just one thing. If it's a long trip, you divide it up into legs of the trip, all right? They're different parts of the journey. And I think that the conclusion I reached is that I don't have to deny my spiritual experiences. All I have to do is realize, as experience has shown me, that what they're doing is they're not calling me to the end of the journey. If it's leading me to the LDS church, it doesn't mean the LDS church is the end of the journey. This is one leg of the journey. And it doesn't mean that there won't be other legs of the journey that go in different places. So if my inner self or an outer self or wherever these feelings or experiences come from are understood to be not go to the Mormon church and there you stay for the rest of your life, but this is one step and one leg of a journey that I'm calling you to. And I'm just calling you to the first leg of this journey, and then to the next leg, and then to a leg after that, and beyond that. Mormonism wants to say, no, you're not going anywhere. We've got you, and you can't leave. Okay? So I just wanted to tie that off by saying this is one of the important ways for me that I've been able to recontextualize my spiritual experiences. I continue to have spiritual experiences. I'm in the middle of a spiritual experience right now where I feel like I am being impelled to do something. And it's been a month and I haven't done it yet, but it's still, it's a problem, right? It weighs on me. And so I've got to take care of this. I don't know if it's coming from inside or outside. I just know it's something that I'm supposed to do. Okay. So that was it. Now, if you have any thoughts about that, fine. If not, I'm done with my segue in the middle of this. We can get back to the slides that you have created.
I did have one thing to say about it, which is just to bolster what you're saying and connect it back to the Light and Truth letter. For folks who remember, the Light and Truth letter opens with this story that Austin tells of telling his wife that he wasn't sure he believed in the church anymore. And she basically told him, and this is where the name of the book comes from, that if he could find more light and truth outside of the church, she would join him in that journey or whatever it is.
It was a really close thing because the title of the book was almost the "We're not going to have sex again" letter. It was either that or the Light and Truth letter.
That wouldn't have sold as well, but probably would have connected with more of the audience. It's really struck me as we've gone through this how the journey that this letter takes folks on really is saying, because we know that light and truth in the Mormon context have very specific definitions. And really, in effect, what Austin's wife said to him, whether she realized it or not, I'm not saying it was some manipulation tactic. We don't recognize the waters we're swimming in. But what she really said, from my perspective, is if you can find a more Mormon Mormonism outside of Mormonism, I will join you in that more Mormon non-Mormonism. What I mean by that is by saying, if you can find greater light and truth, she defines light and truth, and Austin defines light and truth throughout the entirety of this letter in the context that he learned from the time he was a child, and then is expecting to find some different way to define those terms without changing his paradigm or changing his perspective. And I think that bolsters your point really well and connects it back to the letter at a meta level. That's why it doesn't go anywhere, because it doesn't ever re-examine like the definitions or the perspective that it's looking at these issues under.
Yeah, from my perspective, Austin has been looking for light in all the wrong places. Now we're going back to the letter. Oh,
So
this is from the chapter 1, isn't it?
No, this is from this chapter. So when he frames it as the critics needing to explain away experiences like we've talked about, that's not our objective today. He gives this list of these different psychological effects that different critics have pointed to. So I'm not really going to belabor all of these. I'll just read some of them. So the backfire effect, which is basically this idea that if you challenge someone's belief, they actually believe it harder, right? We see this especially with conspiracy-minded thinkers. If you've ever talked to like, oh, here's a great example, a great contemporary example. Another secret guilty pleasure of mine is watching flat earth YouTube videos and responses to flat earth YouTube videos. And there was literally a guy who funded an expedition that included some legitimate scientists and 2 of the most prominent flat earth YouTubers to go down to Antarctica and watch the midnight sun, because in Antarctica, the sun isn't going to set. That's inexplicable if the earth was actually flat. It is definitive, real-time proof that the earth is not flat. And yet the flat earth community lost its minds when they've got these YouTubers that they've followed in this insane flat earth journey saying, yeah, we saw the sun for the 24 hours. It didn't set. We filmed it. There's all these things that they try and come up with to explain it away. They've been bought and paid for. They edited the video. They didn't actually take them to Antarctica. This is what we refer to as the backfire effect.
These are anti-flat earthers.
Yes, it's the same thing that you've encountered when you've responded to some of the polygamy denier or monogamy affirmer, as they like to call themselves, crowd. Whatever evidence you give them that might disprove their conspiracy just becomes greater proof of the conspiracy.
Yes.
That to me is the definition of the backfire effect when you see that. We've already talked about cognitive dissonance. We've talked about confirmation bias, including the little graphic that people might remember from last episode where we've got Austin on the tentacled monster pointing the confirmation bias monster towards smaller pieces of evidence to ignore the larger pieces of evidence. And then elevation emotion is one that I wanted to talk about in more detail. So he has this table of these psychological effects, real psychological effects, and then says any one or multiple of the critics' explanation could explain some members' experiences. However, how do they account for the collective following? If you'll go to the next slide.
It's almost like a collective witness model.
Almost. So elevation emotion is the one I kind of wanted to focus on because I think it's probably the one that people need to understand the most. So I first learned about the term, and I think it was really popularized by Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Righteous Mind. Elevation is this emotion that's elicited by witnessing actual or imagined virtuous acts of remarkable moral goodness. It is experienced as a distinct feeling of warmth and expansion. What does that sound like, Arfem? Does that sound at all like Alma 32 describing the fruits of the Spirit?
It does, and it kind of sounds like a burning in the bosom from Doctrine and Covenants too.
Yeah. Weird how those things line up, isn't it?
Dang it.
Dang it. It is experienced as a distinct feeling of warmth and expansion that is accompanied by appreciation and affection for the individual whose exceptional conduct is being observed. Elevation motivates those who experience it to open up to, affiliate with, and assist others. Elevation makes an individual feel lifted up and optimistic about humanity. My point here, again, is not to use this as some attempt to explain these experiences away. It's to say this is a phenomenon that you can experience that exists outside of Mormonism. And that's obvious because Jonathan Haidt isn't a Mormon, and he's the one who's popularized this term and this idea. These ideas sound very connected to the Mormon experience of feeling the Spirit because it's a universal human experience. It's just that people who grew up inside of Mormonism or maybe weren't given this idea at the time they were younger, they think it's unique to Mormonism when it truly is not.
This first sentence reminds me of Christianity as a whole.
Right.
Elevation is an emotion elicited by witnessing actual or imagined virtuous acts of remarkable moral goodness. I mean, how can you get more virtuous and morally good than if a man lays down his life for his friends? Greater love hath no man than this.
Right. Yeah. It's
especially if God does it.
Right.
Next slide, sir.
Yes. So I will just describe this. This is that scene from Lord of the Rings, Return of the King that we've already talked about. But I remember the first time I ever watched this movie, which I love this series of movies. Watched them recently with my son last year for the first time, and he just loved them. But this scene, along with the other scenes in this series, anything involving Gandalf, big fan of Gandalf. I remember as a Mormon being very confused by feeling strong, overwhelming feeling of what I would have described at that time as the spirit when I watched scenes like this. And the reason is because this is part of the human experience. And it doesn't matter if you call it the spirit, elevation, emotion, whatever you want to call it. It is just part of the universal human experience. It doesn't mean anything about underlying claims about reality is just the point here.
Yeah. Ride now. Ride now. Ride for Gondor. A red day, a sword day, ere the sun rises, and all that stuff. Yeah. So if you haven't seen this movie, go watch it. This is an incredible movie. I agree with you. All three of them. I think all three of them won the Collective Academy Award.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. An absolutely incredible feat by Peter Jackson, who will go down in history for this, much more than his recreation of King Kong in 2005.
Or The Hobbit. Ugh.
Ooh, man. Don't even get me started.
The Hobbit trilogy is wonderful because there's one good movie found interspersed among three movies.
What was it? Because I didn't see it.
I'm saying that collectively across the three movies,
all three movies,
you have maybe the material for one actual good movie.
Well, that's the whole thing. Yes, it should be one movie. It's a children's book, for God's sake. It's not three books, technically six, like the Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
But it's The Hobbit. Make one movie, make it, according to it, and it would be great. Instead, they said, let's take this children's book and let's redo The Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, bad idea. Bad idea, in my opinion. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's go to the next slide before we get a copyright strike.
Yeah, I wanted to also connect this feeling of elevation emotion with an experience I had recently, which is my wife and I, and we've actually talked about this a few times when I've called into Mormonism After Dark. You've asked about this poster that sometimes you can see on one of my walls, which is of this band that my wife and I, well, my entire family really loves, called AJR. They're three brothers from New York, Adam, Jack, Ryan. That's why they came up with the name AJR. And their music just really connects with me in the sense that they play this really poppy orchestral sounding music because of that, growing up in Manhattan, they've got that Broadway influence on their music. And the brother that writes all their music, Ryan, has a condition known as synesthesia, which is basically a form of neurodivergence where he processes sound differently. And so at every single one of their concerts, they will, which Cammie and I have gone to 3 of them now, and we took the kids to one over the summer. So earlier when you asked me, how was your summer? That's part of the reason that it was such a wonderful summer is we took our kids to this concert. Originally, we were thinking we were going to sit in the nosebleeds, but we had people as we were walking in see my adorable kids and say, hey, would you like these extra pit passes that we had for $20? And normally those are like way expensive. So we had this great experience just sitting there. I was holding our youngest, she's 6, just bouncing her as she's singing every word along with me. Anyways, my point is just to underline how these are part of the universal human experience, this feeling of elevation emotion. They came out with this album last year called The Maybe Man, which really deals with these themes of these brothers had lost their dad. They're a little younger than me, and so they're kind of struggling with this millennial or older Gen Z desire to like find yourself in your the middle of your adulthood. And this line from this song, 2085, at the end of the album, I want to read it and then kind of talk about this experience I had with it one day.
So the name of the song is 2085. That's like a year.
Exactly. Yep. And so this stanza says, and go tell your grandson to go tell his grandson. You don't have to try so hard, because I spent my whole life trying to be so liked. That only made him hate me more. Did I make you proud? Did I screw this up? Sing with me loud. It's all that I got to know if I did or not. I'm like getting emotional even just reading that. But I
Why is
remember
that striking you so much?
I think if you're a person like me who struggled with this desire to meet people's expectations, that middle line of I spent my whole life trying to be so liked that only made them hate me more, just really connects with me on an emotional level of trying to fulfill people's expectations, and then maybe going, maybe I don't need to fulfill people's expectations. Maybe it needs to be about me finding my own identity and my own grounding for my identity. Over the last 3.5 years, as I've struggled with redefining my identity, finding that identity, doing that as a family, like raising my kids in this church until we had baptized our oldest and then leaving shortly after that, it just connected with me on a level that I can't even really understand or explain why is the reality RFM. I just know that it did. And I remember I had this experience once as I was listening to this album on my commute. This song hit me in a way that it never had before. It's very much like, and this is the weird thing, connecting back to this idea that this is a universal human experience. The way I would have described the way these lyrics hit me that day as I'm driving to downtown Boise to work, and I'm just bawling listening to this song as a grown man. It's the same feeling that Joseph Smith describes with James 1:5, entering into his heart in a way that Scripture had never entered into before. My point with this is just to share that this is part of the universal human experience, finding things that connect with you, and sometimes not even being able to articulate and explain why, just recognizing the beauty of the rhythm, the music, the lyrics all combining together. We can have this experience, I think, almost more powerfully with music and with creative expressions than we can in any other way. And so my point here is just that this is a universal human experience, not one that's specific to Mormonism or that means anything about ultimate reality. Things can connect with you, and it can mean nothing more than that. When you were talking earlier about how the church not only allows you to have these spiritual experiences or these experiences, but then it also gives you the interpretation. I think one of the things I'd want people to take from me in this episode is you can have those experiences and enjoy them just for what they are. They don't have to mean anything greater than that.
Right. And sometimes there's a peril in applying a definition to an experience like this, which is that now you've pigeonholed it.
Right.
You've cast it in amber, something that was living and alive and beautiful and breathing and mysterious, and now you've stuck it in amber. So you basically killed it, or at least put it in a stasis, and now that's what it's going to be for the rest of your life, when I think that might be a mistake. This does play into the fact that if you could actually have answered my question and told me why this affected you so much, then it probably wouldn't have been something that gave you this experience in the first place. We've entered into the realm of the ineffable.
Right.
That which cannot be spoken in human words, which reminds me of my definition, which I think is a good definition of poetry. This is included in music and art. But I use it in terms of poetry. Poetry is the art of putting into words or expressing with words. Okay. Poetry is the art of expressing with words what cannot be expressed with words. Because poetry is not about the words. It's about what they evoke and the way words are used in order. It's this line between the mundane and the divine. And we can see the mundane and we can experience the divine that it produces in us, but then it's hard to say, how did this happen? Where did this come from? Why is this happening? It's like trying to say why a joke's funny, right? If you can say why a joke's funny, it's not going to be funny anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, Heart Cell. I've heard of these guys.
Yeah. This connects with the discussion we had a little bit ago about how these experiences can in part be manufactured. And for people who haven't heard of this before, John Larson, back in the old Mormon expression days, did an entire deep dive on this and had a whole panel discussion about this. But I'm actually surprised how few people actually know about heart cell. So the church owns a lot of different companies. In fact, the church's corporate structure is more complicated than its plan of salvation, which is its own level of absurdity if we think about it. One of those companies that they own, and in fact, if you've ever listened to General Conference, you'll be familiar with this, is Bonneville International.
Right.
Also owns a subsidiary company called Bonneville Communications. They're in part responsible for broadcasting General Conference. So you'll hear that every General Conference, right? I pulled this directly from their website, as well as I have on the left an image from wasmormon.org, same as you had earlier, where Bonneville Communications explains this patented system they have called Heart Cell. It reads this: at Bonneville Communications, our ability to touch the hearts and minds of audiences makes us an essential resource for organizations with vital messages. And then I'll skip over to the right-hand side because that was the introduction, and now I'll read the rest of it. For more than 30 years, our creative professionals have designed public service and direct response messages for national nonprofit organizations such as the Huntsman Cancer Institute, Boy Scouts of America, National Hospice Foundation, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the Salvation Army. Our unique strength is the ability to touch the hearts and minds of our audiences, evoking first feeling, then thought, and finally action. We call this uniquely powerful brand of creative heart cell, strategic emotional advertising that stimulates response. And I just think I have to point to this when we're having this, discussion with Austin's ideas here, that it is very telling that the church's communications arm has literally created a system that they call strategic emotional advertising that stimulates a response. And it's not just something that they sell to other people. It's important to underline that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is one of their clients, basically their parent company, but one of their clients that uses this powerful brand of creative marketing.
It sounds like the missionary discussions.
It sounds like everything the church does. Like in my mission, so I was in the Tempe mission, the Mesa Temple was just a stone's throw away from our mission. It was actually in the Mesa mission, but we could take investigators there because it was like 10 miles outside of our mission boundaries. And they had a visitor center there where you could go watch Joseph Smith, Prophet of the Restoration, or Our Turn on Earth, all these old church films. And if you had spiritual experiences while watching those films, I guess my point is that was by design. It's the same thing we're talking about with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy and scenes in there.
Mm-hmm.
You can stimulate these feelings because we understand enough about human psychology to stimulate those feelings. Now, is that me explaining these things away? No, it's just recognizing the additional information we know on where these things come from. It's not to say that they're fake. It's not even to say when I use the term manufactured that it means that they're not real. They really happen to you. But we're not being critical thinkers if we're not understanding that those things are in part primed by music, by language, by images. We're just not being realistic if we think that feeling a powerful feeling when we're watching a film like that means something about ultimate reality. It just simply doesn't.
It's almost like they took a lot of these different psychological phenomena that Austin lists in his letter. They took them, they bundled them together. They created some kind of a program. They called it Heart Cell. And now they're selling it to all sorts of other different individuals and companies to do the same thing for them that they do for the Mormon church, which is try and get people to feel emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see here. Hang on just a second. Let's go to it. Okay. So that they can feel first feeling, right? Then thought, and finally action in accordance with that thought, which was produced by that feeling which we created.
Mm-hmm. And that word evoke, is, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say that word evoke is the perfect word there. Like you can evoke this feeling, right? It's there's a collaborative nature to this that I don't think we fully understand, right? It's not completely manufactured. We bring part of that magic with us.
Right. They are bringing it out of us through this manipulative system of way of doing things, this heart cell, but it is in us originally. They're evoking it. Is that your point?
Yes.
When I read this, and I've read it before, but it's striking me again, and I just get this feeling. I feel kind of used. I feel like I was played upon. My feelings were played upon by an organization using a method. I know this didn't exist in 1978, but it kind of did. It just didn't have the name.
Right.
And the copyright attached to it. But this is exactly what was done to me. And I think it's done to a lot of members, people, to get them to join the church or to have these spiritual experiences while they're inside the church, this whole heart cell technique.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think it's more than just thinking. I think they basically admitted it on Bonneville International's webpage.
Exactly. I think the next slide too will connect to this well. I don't remember if it's So just to show, this is from the Wikipedia page on Bonneville International. So Bonneville International is a media and broadcasting company wholly owned by the church. And my point here was just, if people were to say, well, that's just Bonneville International. No, it's not. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of the church through its for-profit arm, the Deseret Management Corporation.
Got it.
Great. So while we're talking about stimulating or evoking spiritual experiences,
this is another video we're not going to be able to play for you because of YouTube and copyright strikes.
That's right. But I would highly recommend people go watch this. So this is a TEDx talk from Salt Lake. It's probably like 10 years ago. I think maybe it was 2012. I should have snipped the year. I didn't. But the TEDx talk is called "This Is Your Brain on God." People can just Google that and it'll pop right up. It's by a neuroscientist known as Michael Ferguson. He has his own website where he's continued some of this research. If you'll go to the next slide, we're not going to watch it, but I'll break it down for you. So in this TEDx talk, Michael Ferguson, this neuroscientist, talks about a study that he did that kind of gives him the title of his presentation. This is your brain on God. What he did, so he's in Salt Lake, based in Salt Lake. I think at the U of U's medical centers or medical school is probably where they did this study. What they did was they showed LDS participants. He does like a really charming introduction to Mormonism for people who aren't familiar with it. It's a great presentation. And what he does in this study is he shows Mormon participants spiritual quotations alongside photos of religious leaders that those statements were attributed to. They were asked while they're in an MRI machine to rate how strongly they felt the spirit. And this individual, this Michael Ferguson, was able to locate, and he'll talk about this in the TEDx talk if people watch it. He was able to locate the 3 areas of the brain that light up like a Christmas tree in an MRI machine while Mormon individuals said they were feeling the spirit. So you can go and get more detail on that by listening to it. But a second part of the study was this use of these quotations. And the interesting thing was they asked the participants in the study to rate how strongly they were feeling that feeling of the spirit as they looked at different sets of these quotations. Some of them involved in-group spiritual leaders. So this was done at a time when Thomas Monson was still the prophet. Mm-hmm. So Thomas Monson, Jeff Holland, and Dieter Uchtdorf. Then they also had quotes, spiritual quotes, from out-group spiritual leaders. So Pope Francis, who would have been the Pope at the time, Billy Graham, and Desmond Tutu. What people can see on the right-hand side is that, unsurprisingly, well, why don't you explain what you see in this data?
What I see is that when Mormons were presented with quotes, all of these quotes are represented as being from leaders of the LDS Church, right?
Yes. So their feelings in the columns to the right, the blue columns, show how the Mormons rated how strongly they felt the spirit with their in-group spiritual leaders quotes. Weirdly, Monson was the lowest of all of them. But what you can see is the left-hand columns, the ones in red, are the out-group spiritual leaders. And so you can see there's a pretty marked difference between how the participants rated how strongly they felt the spirit versus in-group and out-group quotations. Does that make sense? Are you seeing the same connection as me?
Is the point of this, I mean, it represents 2 things to me. First off, is that those outgroup voices, the Desmond Tutu, the Billy Graham, and the Pope Francis, are all rated substantially lower in the feelings of the spirit that are reported when hearing the in-group, although none of them are identified, and they're actually all said to be from Mormon leaders. But nevertheless, even though they're lower, they're not zero.
They weren't all identified to come from Mormon leaders. So
Oh, they weren't.
they had a series of quotes that are attributed to the Mormon leaders, and they're asking them to rate their spiritual experience. Then they had a series of quotes that were attributed to these other figures, Desmond Tutu, Billy Graham, Pope Francis, and they're asking them to rate those as well. And so consistently, the Mormon participants rated the feeling of the spirit lower for these out-group leaders from the in-group leaders. Does that make sense?
They know that these quotes are from out-group leaders. That's where I got mixed up.
Correct. But
so they know that these are from out-group leaders, and therefore they rate them lower than those of the Mormon leaders.
Correct. So unsurprisingly, basically, here's how I would sum up what we see in this data. Unsurprisingly, Mormons feel the spirit or report feeling the spirit stronger with in-group leaders rather than out-group leaders. But here is the delicious twist of this study. Will you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
None of the quotes that were attributed to either the in-group leaders or the out-group leaders actually came from the figures they were attributed to. Instead, they were jumbled depending on the participant, and all of the quotes came from C.S. Lewis. So to explain my graphic here on the right, I've got a classic, sorry, the next one. I've got
this graphic.
No, back one.
Forgive me.
That's okay. I've got Fred, our friend from Scooby-Doo, and he's taking the mask off the bad guy like happens at the end of every episode of Scooby-Doo. And I've got a photo of C.S. Lewis there interposed over the bad guy's face. The point here is that difference that we saw in these participants rating those spiritual experiences different versus in-group versus out-group leaders was completely imagined, because all of the quotes came from the same source. They all came from C.S. Lewis. So the quotes that were attributed to Thomas Monson came from C.S. Lewis. The quotes that were attributed to Billy Graham came from C.S. Lewis. And which ones were attributed to which leaders was random based on the participant. The point
So it wasn't so much about what was said, but who said it.
Exactly. Which goes along with this idea that this is not to say that experience didn't happen to these people. It's just to say that if we're going to take Austin's claims that these spiritual experiences mean something truly real about reality, it's very hard to take that seriously when we can see the psychological effect going on here. Your thoughts?
Now that I understand, after having asked a few questions, exactly what this is showing, yeah, mind blown. Absolutely. Well, It is, but it's not. It is blown in that, okay, it's not blown in the fact that, yeah, this is what I would totally expect. It is blown in the fact that this was able to be measured in an experiment that this fellow did. Is brilliant.
Right. And if I can say one thing that I really liked about the end of his presentation, you can see on this graph that he has before spiritual practice there. So one of the points that he tries to make is that they asked the participants to do what we've just talked about before and after they did a 30-minute, it was either 30-minute or an hour, I can't remember, a 30-minute private spiritual exercise, either prayer or scripture study. And one of the points that he makes is that after the participants did their individual personal spiritual practice for that half hour or hour, whatever it was, we saw the disparity between the in-group and out-group spiritual discrepancy. We saw that get a lot smaller. And so his point is that the more we try and connect with the divine, or one of the points he's trying to make, the more we try and truly connect with the divine on an individual level, the more universalist we feel, the more compassion or the more spirit we feel even to our out-group. There was still a difference, though. And so his point is slightly different from the point I'm using this data to make, which is just to say we can track on a scientific level, like through this study, the fact that our spiritual experiences are in part what we bring to the table and are in part primed by our expectations. And I think this shows this almost indisputably.
Very good. So what would you say that if you're talking to Austin Fife right now, how would you tell him that this study impacts his chapter that we've been covering?
Well, I think that's where we'd have to have a conversation about like what critical thinking demands. And we'd have to talk about how this isn't to explain away these experiences. It's to help contextualize them as part of this universal human experience. And if we can see that Mormons are able to conjure a greater level of spirit with Mormon leaders, even when the quotes aren't attributed to Mormon leaders, I am not explaining away anything by recognizing that spirituality is in part informed by our expectations. We're just, I think, level setting at that point. Does that make sense? That's what I would say to Austin. What
Tell
would
me
you
about
say?
the level setting part. I got the part about our spirituality is informed by our expectations. We're going to feel the spirit more when we think these quotes are coming from Mormon leaders than we do when the same quotes or batch of quotes are coming from non-Mormon leaders. That's our expectations. What's the non-leveling?
Here's what I mean is if Austin is going to use testimony and spiritual witnesses as legitimate evidence that people should seriously consider, they have that spiritual experience has to be relating to some like supernal underlying truth. And what we're seeing here by the effects of this study or by the results of this study is we're seeing that it doesn't work that way, because where the quotes were mixed up and attributed to the wrong figure, we're able to see that there's a level of subjectivity to this spiritual experience that relates directly to our expectations. And that, to me, disproves the notion that this spiritual experience that people are having, which is a legitimate experience, again, part of the normal human emotional experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's just showing that spiritual experience that Austin thinks is evidence of something underlying or deeper. It doesn't mean what he thinks it means. And I think this study, I was going to say, and I think this study shows that definitively, because if the spirit really was able to connect people to some objective truth, what should have happened is the Mormons should have been able to see through the ruse, and they weren't able to do that. Or we should have seen the results show in some way, since all the quotes came from the same individual, they should have been at the same level, but we don't see that.
So spiritual experiences may not be so much about finding truth as it is to our own expectations of what we're going to feel.
Right. At least in part. In part.
That's
right.
Very, very interesting, that study. I hope that Austin will watch this. I hope he'll respond to it. I don't know if he's watched any of the other episodes we've done. I don't think he's really responded to them. I think he's taking a sabbatical at this point while he's busy writing some other book. Hopefully be a book about his journey so we can learn all the ins and outs of that 2 or 3 weeks when he was having some doubts about church while still going.
Yeah.
There's C.S. Lewis, the C.S. Lewis ruse. And then this one. This is what you were talking about.
Yes. So this is a personal spiritual experience that I had. And it actually, this experience that I'm going to describe here in a minute, I think helps people understand the psychology at play in spiritual experiences. And one of the things I wanted to share is this personal experience I have where spiritual experiences build and aggregate over time. They get exaggerated in our memory. And what I'm trying to say here is that I'm going to share an experience where I did this myself without even knowing. So I want people to understand that when I'm saying spiritual experiences aggregate and grow and get exaggerated over time, and there's this collaborative, almost improvisational element to spiritual experiences, that is not me saying that they're not real or they didn't happen. But we need to understand the psychological effects that we can see. So let me just tell the story, and maybe it'll.
You're one of these missionaries praying.
I am one of these missionaries praying.
The one on the right.
Sure, we'll do the one on the right. Yeah.
Okay.
I had this experience in my first area on my mission, again in Tempe, where a companion and I were teaching an individual who sought out the Mormon missionaries because she claimed that she could see spirits. And when I say claim she could see spirits, I mean literally like the kid in The Sixth Sense. And I know when, I could see dead people. And the reason that she sought us out, she knew nothing about Mormons, but she had a coworker that was listening to her describe her experience of seeing these spirits around her, including preborn spirits, like children that she was expecting to have, or children that she felt she was going to have that she did not have yet.
How old
As
was she?
she was in her 30s, probably young 30s, I would say. And I know when I say that someone claimed that, people are going to say like, well, she was probably crazy. I spoke with this woman numerous times, multiple times, and she otherwise seemed completely normal and completely lucid, and described this experience in a way that wasn't like, it wasn't like she was scared. It was just something that she had experienced since she was a girl. And the reason that she sought out the Mormon missionaries and we met with her is because she had a Mormon coworker that, as she was hearing her describe her experiences, said like, that sounds exactly like what Mormons believe about the spirit world, that we believe that the spirits of the people who have yet to be born are here, that the spirit world is here, and that's probably what you're seeing.
This sounds like a great missionary story in the making.
It's a fantastic missionary story in the making. So we teach this woman a lesson, and I remember one time she was sharing with us like some of the darker things that she had seen, or some of the heaviness that came along with that experience. And I don't remember exactly what she shared with us. I just remember that she was sharing with us the struggles that came from what she was experiencing. And I remember that my companion and I rode home, and we were, overwhelmed with compassion for her and wanting to teach her, help her,
and get her baptized.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But I remember that as my companion and I came home, and so many missionaries have a story like this, right? We felt this dark presence, this dark feeling, and we prayed. We resolved that feeling. It was kind of an ordeal. Like, it kind of went on all night, us talking about feeling this dark feeling, wondering if there were dark spirits around us.
But you prayed. It didn't work?
But we prayed, and eventually it worked.
Oh, okay.
And that experience was probably the most powerful spiritual experience I had ever had in my life. I never saw anything, but we felt such deep feelings that as my companion and I talked about it, this is a story that I had testified of over and over and over again since it had happened. Okay. And so the reason I have these two images together is, in the image on the left, we've got the two missionaries praying, and it's kind of like a normal setting. They're just in their missionary apartment. In the picture on the right, I've got the same exact image, but I've put in all these dark, evil spirits, including the devil, right? And this light from above that rescues these missionaries. And my point in sharing this entire experience is, I had been testifying of this experience that I had had for years. And I had testified about how my companion and I had felt surrounded by these dark spirits, how we had felt this light, this overwhelming presence, and including testifying of like the presence, again, never saw anything, but the presence of angels that literally came to save us from this darkness. And here's the thing. When I was going through my faith crisis, I went and I read back through my mission journal. And one of the things that I was surprised to find was that I had two different recountings of this experience. And what you're seeing in this image are the two different versions of this spiritual experience as they were recorded in my journal. In the first, the one that I wrote that night, my companion and I felt overwhelmed by compassion for her. We did feel this heaviness, but we prayed, we talked, we probably read some scriptures. The feeling resolved and we went to bed. The one that I recounted like in my journal about a week later, something like that, maybe 8-9 days, as my companion and I were riding bikes and we were talking and we were reflecting on the experience, it got exaggerated. And I'm not saying that we were lying. I'm saying that there's a reality to talking about these experiences. And this isn't unique to spiritual experiences. We do this with memories. When we access a memory, we are in effect rewriting and recontextualizing and reinterpreting that memory. There's nothing untoward going on here. It's just the way that our brains work, unfortunately. And I was so surprised in the middle of my faith crisis to go back and look at this story in my own journal, in my own handwriting, and recognize that the version I had been telling for years was not only the exaggerated version, but had been exaggerated itself. And when I actually went to go look at what had happened that night in my own handwriting, it was a lot less miraculous. Not to say it didn't happen, but there's an element to this aggregation of spiritual experiences that I think people need to understand. And having experienced that real time with my own memory was just an experience that helped me understand spiritual experiences. Like, I'm so grateful I did that, because otherwise I would be struggling here trying to think like, well, I really felt this dark presence. Like, anyways, your thoughts.
Well, you said it was in your own handwriting, because if it were in your own handwriting, it would be pretty damning. That's my thought. And I wanted to save that because I didn't want to take away from the point you were making by making this Jacob Hansen reference, because that would be that if that were your own handwriting, that would be pretty damning. Look closely.
It was. And this, so to connect this back to a greater Mormonism point, we had a whole episode with Austin's letter dealing with the witnesses, right? And if people want to understand why I don't accept the witness's testimony at face value, it's because I can't accept my own exaggerated recollections years later. Like, I've had this experience myself where the original experience has been built upon and has aggregated more miraculous elements over time. And when I've seen that in my own psychology, it's just impossible to ignore the likely effect that it's occurring to other people when they share their personal spiritual experiences as well. Again, that's not to take away from them and say they didn't happen. It did happen. But as we think about it more and as we reflect on it, and as that's the narrative that we're finding meaning in, we build more things into the actual experience than actually happened. That's at least my experience.
Now, that is interesting, because when you were talking, and as I'm looking at these pictures, the thought that's coming to me is that the pictures on the left are the three witnesses. This is what it looks like when they're having their spiritual experience, right? Of course, there's only two. Martin's left. So they're having their spiritual experience, their vision of the angel and the plates and the table and setting it forth and turning over leaves and all that stuff, the angel, and the voice from God coming down and bearing testimony about the Book of Mormon and the plates and what's on them. And then over here on the right, this is what the three witnesses are experiencing internally, or at least what they are recalling as having experienced.
Right. And if I can drive this point home, when I'm recognizing this bifurcation that I see in my own life, I'm not saying the witnesses are lying. This is what happens to our memory, and especially happens to experiences like this. Like you said it earlier perfectly. When we're dealing with the ineffable, this is what happens. And it's not calling someone a liar to just recognize maybe that experience, as sacred as it can be to that individual, as sacred as this experience still is to me, obviously, describing it. It doesn't mean that I'm calling that person a liar by recognizing the way our psychology works and recognizing that spiritual experiences do not map to some objective claim about the way reality works. That's the point of this story.
Right. And this is the wonder of the ineffable. And it's also the danger of the ineffable, because it's not effable, because you can't speak it, because you can't describe it really with words. You can only approximate it. It makes it something that is mystical and awe-inspiring and a wonderful part of the human experience, frankly. But it's also something that's subject to this kind of shifting and changing over time.
Right. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that I had my companion there with me, and that this was an experience I had with someone, was a very important part of why it evolved and aggregated over time. And if people want to understand what I'm seeing here, all they need to look at is the reality of Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon's vision that's recorded in Doctrine and Covenants 76. That's often referred to as the vision. It is very similar. When I finally read the reality of that experience, it mapped very well with my companion and I's experience in the days after this experience happened, where we're riding around and we're talking about it, we're reflecting on it, and it's the same type of thing. I felt X. Did you feel X? yeah, I felt Y. Did you feel Y? There's nothing untoward or dishonest about this. This is just what happens when our brains are trying to find meaning in the ineffable.
By the way, thumbnail, what Colby's talking about is that Joseph Smith in the vision would say, there's a room of men, they're sitting, Joseph and Sydney are in it. And Joseph says, I see such and so. Do you see that? And Sydney, nobody else in the room sees anything. Okay. Except for Sydney and Joseph. And Joseph says, I see this. Do you see that? And Sydney says, yes, I see that. And I see this. I see something in addition to it. Do you see that? And just, yeah, I see that. And I see this. So this whole vision rolls out as one of these, it's almost a parlor game about, here's this part of the story. And now I'm going to stop with one sentence. And now you pick up the story and you say the next sentence of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'll say the next sentence. And usually you have more people than two, but two was all it took here to come up with the vision of the 3 degrees of glory, which may account for some of the reasons why, if you look at it closely, it's frankly disjointed in a number of ways. And it doesn't exactly track. It's not exactly smooth. It gives evidence of its own composition method.
Exactly.
Let's go to this next slide. Oh, hey, I know that guy. Who is that?
Yeah, I still had hope in my eyes back then.
You had light in your eyes.
I did. So I don't want to do like a super extended explanation about this, but for people who don't know, the way I kind of entered this ex-Mormon podcasting space was my wife and I in February of 2022, we appeared with John DeLynn on Mormon Stories, and we talked about this experience we had where our bishop at the time, the year before actually, was charged with several child sex abuse crimes. And one of the other things I think it's important for me to get on the record as I talk about this idea of spiritual witnesses is one of the things that was so fatal to my ultimate belief in the church, or reconciling my belief in the church based on spiritual evidence, is that bishop, when he was called, was actually a friend of mine from high school. And he was very young when he was called as a bishop. I think he was 31 at the time he was called. And I remember being concerned about his maturity level and just a few other things. We kind of butted heads on some things. And so,
but isn't it true that in Mormonism, a guy who gets called at a young age to be a bishop is generally viewed as a sign of his righteousness?
Absolutely. I mean, any bishop is viewed as being called on account of their righteousness.
Right, but a young bishop is going places. He might be a GA because he's getting on this track early.
Yeah, unfortunately, this guy had the criminal justice system in his future instead of the red velvet chairs. But I think one of the things that's important for me to get on the record, especially if any of my friends or family that are still believers listen to this, that I would hope they could just sit with for a moment, is I'm like ashamed to admit this, RFM. It wasn't the fact that my bishop was charged with child sex abuse crimes that dated back a decade before his calling as a bishop that killed my testimony. It was the fact that I specifically had an experience where I went and prayed about this person's calling as a bishop because I was worried about his level of maturity. I was worried about his age. I was worried about some other things. And I had the same exact witness of the Spirit telling me that he was the right person to be the bishop in my ward at that time, as I did when I read and prayed about the Book of Mormon.
Oh, no.
And it's that experience of knowing that the Spirit testified to me of something that was false, that made it so that I cannot accept spiritual experiences or spiritual evidence or spiritual witnesses as mapping to an objective claim about reality. And to be fair, my stake president at the time said that, sometimes God works in mysterious ways. So you could go that way with my experience and basically say, no, that was a real spiritual testimony, and God, for whatever reason, did want him to be the bishop. I refuse to believe that, in part because I believe better things about a God that I don't believe in than to accept that explanation. That just is not something that I'm willing to accept. And so I wanted to share that experience to just underscore again that spiritual experiences happen. I'm not denying I had that experience. I remember it very well. I'm pointing out that having that experience did not mean something about the ultimate reality of the truth.
That is a very powerful experience, Kolby, and one that I had, though nowhere near as personally. It wasn't someone I knew, but it was with Paul H. Dunn.
Mm-hmm.
And the spirit that I bore testimony to me that his fake, made-up war stories were true. Yeah, that was very difficult to deal with once it came out, not because of the church, but because of an independent reporter who went public with the story in spite of pressure put on him by the church not to. Yeah, about the fact that these were all made up. So these are difficult challenges for those who want to place evidentiary value and faith in spiritual experiences. Though they may seem strong, they may seem to point one direction, there's a lot of reasons to question them. And the interpretation of them is something that's important too, to contextualize them. I mean, if you got an experience where you're feeling the spirit about something that you find out later is wrong, how do you trust the spirit anymore? What you find out for a fact is that feelings of the spirit are not a valid method for arriving at the truth.
Yeah, the analogy I've used before, and I actually inherited this from my sister-in-law, is if we think of like currencies between different nations, right? You have to do this exchange when you go to a different country. To me, I'm not belittling spiritual experiences. I'm not denying I've had them. I'm not denying you've had them. I'm not denying anyone who's listened to them has had them. But to me, spiritual experiences are not a currency that correlates to truth. And what I mean by that is it's very hard for me when I have discussions with believers to know how to treat their spiritual experiences respectfully, but to basically say, I just don't recognize that currency here because of the experiences I have had.
Right. It's not something that I can consider as evidence because I know from my personal experience that it doesn't amount to evidence. It's part of the human experience, but it's not a good way at arriving at truth, as my own personal experience has demonstrated to me.
Exactly.
Wow. I think we've done a great job at covering this chapter. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode again. Kolby, I hope to have you with me for the few episodes that remain. We want, once again, not only to express our appreciation to everybody who's watching, but also to ask you to hit subscribe, please. And once again, we got to say, Austin, if you want to come on the show and talk about these things in a public format with people to whom this letter was written by you, it starts off, Dear Critics of the Church, then you're welcome. I'm getting the feeling that you don't want to come on because we've been doing this for almost a year now and making these pleas or invitations to you, and I've heard nothing from you in response. I'm getting the idea that you don't want to come on. I'm starting to get a complex. What do you think, Kolby? Is Austin ever going to come on the show to defend his letter?
Austin's not going to come on to defend his letter, but I will say, if he were, this would be a perfect chapter to just have an honest discussion about this. Like, if his spiritual experiences mean things, why don't ours? Right? That's the reality of what we're talking about. Why don't other people's spiritual experiences mean as much to the Mormons as the Mormons' spiritual experiences mean to them? That's the problem with viewing it as evidence, is that the evidence abounds in any faith system or in non-spiritual systems, or I'm sorry, non-faith-based systems. And so I think, Austin, my honest plea would be that you would join us to talk about this episode if you're going to pick any of the ones to talk about.
And you're certainly welcome. Remember, just go ahead and email me at radiofreemormon1@gmail.com, Austin, and we'll take it from there. But I keep telling you this, and I keep not hearing anything from you, and I'm starting to wonder if you really mean that you want to talk to critics about these aspects of your church. So, once again, if you want to talk about this alone, this would be great. We'd have a lot of fun. I'm just not going to hold my breath anymore because I'm starting to get blue in the face. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully, you'll join us next time. Thanks again, Kolby. And I'm going to hit the outro music here, and I'm going to say it's a miracle that we got this done in just a little over 2 hours. This may be a record for us, but we'll see. Thanks, everybody, for watching. See you next time on Radio Free Mormon. Good night, everybody.